From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Chicago is not the second or third or fourth or fifth city now in at least one way. It is the author, it's the owner of a plan to close more schools at a single time than any other city in American history. Chicago School Board Wednesday approved elimination of 49 elementary schools, 11 co-locations, and turnarounds at 5 schools. What's that mean? Here to talk about it, a panel of reporters that your regular host for Chicago Newsroom, Ken Davis, has described as the most education, intellectual power ever packed into a half-hour show. Right here on this show now. WBEZ education reporter Linda Lutton, Chicago Tribune education reporter Noreen Ahmed-Ullah, Catalyst Chicago deputy editor Sarah Karp, and I'm Charlie Meyerson. Not part of the firepower part. Ken's taking the next couple of weeks off. He's left me the keys to the mug cabinet, so let's take this for a spin. I want to quickly spell out some terms so everyone knows what we're talking about. Closing, I think everybody gets. Those schools this fall will be out of business, right? What does co-location mean? How many schools are affected by it, and what's turnaround mean for those other 5 schools?
So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So along with closing, there's a bunch of schools that are also being relocated. That means those schools are remaining open, but they're moving into a building that is being closed. So just to make it even more confusing, there's also the term relocation. Closing, like you said, is straight on. Turnarounds means that everybody in that school, all the staff gets fired, and the school is basically run by a private institution called the Academy for Urban School Leadership, which in the education world we call AUSL. And co-location means that in one building, in one facility, you may have more than one school. Most of the time, it's actually a charter that's sharing a building space with a neighborhood school.
And just to give you a sense of what the closings mean, like I'll give you a concrete example. In Englewood, we are closing Goodloe School, which in this case means all the staff is leaving and the Goodloe name goes away. Earl is the receiving school. Earl is down the street a bit, right? But all the kids from Earl are leaving the Earl building. So Earl sort of feels like it's closing too. It's not really closing because its staff is still there, but the building, the Earl building, is the one to be lost. So it's very complicated, and the closings don't necessarily coincide with the buildings that are being closed.
How do these numbers that we've come out with compare with the plan's evolution over the last few months? I mean, has there been any evolution, or is this in essence the same plan that was laid out by the administration months ago?
Noreen should talk about that.
Right,
She's written about the numbers a lot.
You're elected.
So back in September during the strike, there was discussion even during contract negotiations about the number of schools that would be closed and the staff that would be fired, the teachers that would be losing their jobs, and so that played a role way back in September. Sometime, I think, was it in October? I don't know, I can't remember when I got it. But, I think it was at the time of the strike, we actually got the number of 80 to 120 schools which were being considered. Then in October, November, Barbara Byrd Bennett came on the scene, Mr. Brizard was gone, and she said she wanted the extra time to, start fresh, that they were not looking at the 80 to 120 number, that they wanted to start fresh in this process. So she asked the state legislature for an extension. She got it. And then shortly thereafter, they came out with a list of 330 schools that were underutilized in the school system. Then I think in December, we actually got a document from September the 10th, which actually laid out the number of schools that they were looking at. And in that document, it was about 90 to 100 schools that were sort of targeted, that were part of their analysis.
That was a great story. It was an internal memo.
It was an internal
the Tribune
memo.
obtained, and they'd been denying all along that there was a list, and the Tribune got this important internal memo that showed us there had been quite a bit of thinking going on, really inside, about numbers, about exactly how many schools should be closed in what regions of the city.
And what networks of the city, which are like mini sort of school districts. So in each mini school district, exactly how many schools should be closed. And again, that led to, school CEO Barbara Bird Bennett and the school board president David Vitale saying that, no, we don't have a number, we don't have a number. This was just analysis that we were doing, and just like any other school system, we need to do the analysis. And then let me just bring you down to 2 more numbers. So then there's a commission that came on board. They sort of studied the whole school closing procedure. They came up with different criteria. The number pared down again to 129, and I want to say it was in January.
Something January or February, maybe. But yeah, January maybe,
February,
because they started
yeah.
those hearings in
Sometime,
February. Those
exactly,
community
so it was in
hearings
January. So more community hearings in which they said, the district said, that they were taking community feedback and they were taking input, and then that number came down to the 53, 54, and now we're down to 49.
And one of the things about the numbers is that I kind of feel like this was a whole like PR sort of setup where they were I think they were trying to see how many they could close, and they went from a larger number to a smaller number. They're trying to say, oh, we took a lot off the list, but I really think that the whole process was sort of gauging what would be the political stakes of doing 100 or doing 50, or could they only do 20? And I think that was part of what we were reporting, was sort of this ongoing discussion on the inside of what they can do, what they could get away with.
It seems to me that based on my experience, that's an overarching strategy that we've seen in a number of initiatives from the Emanuel administration, where they start out asking for the moon and then, or the sun, and wind up settling for the moon when perhaps it seems all along what they were really shooting for was the moon. So was Chicago mooned in this case? Did the public in any sense, that was an interesting transition, wasn't it? I mean, in any sense, looking at this broad arc from a year ago, a couple of years ago, did the public really have any say in what ultimately unfolded at the school board? Was there any give or take on the part of the administration?
Well, I think, it depends on who you ask, right? So if you're going to ask the district, if you're going to ask the mayor, he's going to say, yes, this whole process was about community engagement, and it's because we did the community engagement that the number came down so much substantially. If you talk to people within the community, they will say that no, you knew all along which schools were going to be closing, and so we never had a shot at it. That we came out to these community meetings, we came out to these hearings, and nobody was listening to us. Towards the end, the last set of hearings, which were like public hearings, we actually wrote a story about it. The number of people that were coming to some of these, it actually, like 10, 20 people to some of these hearings. Because if you talk to people, they were just like, we've given up. They've made up their mind, and our school's going to be closed, and we can't do anything to fight it.
And I also think that was part of the strategy. There were so many community hearings. We're talking about 150, actual, law, under the law they had to have those hearings. And then before, there was this whole other set of community hearings, but it was 2 in every network. So you had a lot of times for people to come out, and I think that sort of did wane some of the resistance, because at some point, you've gone to 2 or 3 meetings and your school's still on the list, and you're like, what's going to happen,
And also, initially when they had identified the 330 schools, that's half the schools in our school system, right? So you had many, many folks come out to try to say, look, there's no way we should belong on this list. And I'm not sure if this played a big role, but it certainly was an opportunity for the school district to see which aldermen are fighting, which schools have a lot of spunk and spark and are already getting press about why they shouldn't be closed, and which ones sort of might go more quietly.
Because they had no constituency.
I don't know how much of a role that played, but it certainly gave the district an opportunity to take a look at how hard it would have to fight to shut somebody down.
So there's an example, like I had written about Brentano, which is in the Logan Square community, and it was on that initial list of 330. Was it on 129?
Yes,
it was on 129 too. And that community, they really launched a really great campaign. They got all these signatures. They were going door to door, handing out postcards to people. They actually started a preschool program in the school, and they really started a marketing drive to bring more young families within that school. So again, for the district leadership, what does that say? That this is a school where, the community around it, they're going to really fight hard.
So in some sense, there was input from the community. You're giving me the sense that the community, that some communities at least, were heard, did have a chance to alter thinking, whether they did or not.
Right, but I was struck, in covering this, that you do have communities oftentimes that have more or less capacity to make their case in the media and frankly to make their case to the school district, and that doesn't necessarily, I don't think, reflect on what's being offered at their schools. And I heard as a journalist many folks bringing up very valid concerns that depending on their savvy and the political backing in some cases of their aldermen, they were more or less successful. It didn't always have to do with the merits of their arguments, and that's something I think, you had, for instance, the Sun-Times editorial, after having a couple of months to look at this, found at least 21 schools they felt were making some sort of argument that was worth enough that they shouldn't be shut down. And they put that number at least 21, and then when you saw the board vote, essentially 4 schools were taken off that list, but just one school yesterday had a non-unanimous vote. That was a little surprising for me.
Yeah, it was.
Were you surprised by that?
Yeah, I was. I thought that I sort of thought that some of the people, like maybe Mahalia Hines and maybe Asquith would vote no on more of the issues. More of the items. However, Beanon at least said to us that the board members influenced those 4 being taken off, so that they drove that. Now, we don't know exactly.
And so the story that we wrote today was sort of about, some of the lobbying or the horse trading that was going on behind the scenes, and I think there was a message that was put out, even though some board members said that they never had a conversation with the mayor. I think there was definitely a message that was put out. Look, you have this much wiggle room. You can only take off so many. And so the board really had to sort of figure out which ones they were really gonna, fight for. And you mentioned sort of some of the arguments, like in Munir's case. Munir argued that they had all these, millions of dollars of program investments that were put into the school. Well, there's a lot of schools that have millions of dollars in investments in their school, and they were not taken off the list. But Munir had, a hearing officer, a retired circuit court judge who actually opposed the closing. Munir also had an alderman who really, fought hard with Rahm and lobbied to get that school off the list, and they had a really pretty strong community, and people sort of, coalesced around that community. But there's other schools out there that have millions, probably even more, in terms of program investment, and they're getting closed.
Mm-hmm.
You first of all, I want to say I'm grateful to all of you for being here, because as we record this, yesterday was the school board meeting, and you all had busy days and nights. What was it like in the meeting? What was the tenor? You've all, among you, covered decades worth of school board materials, school board activities. Was this different in any way?
There's a lot of people being carried out of the board meeting. There were
Heavy security.
Several disturbances.
And several disturbances. It seemed like it was like the people who were there, it was sort of a, they were pleading, the ones that, not the ones that were sort of protesting, but the ones that were just talking. I mean,
the parents were giving a final appeal, basically.
Yeah. Even the aldermen. I mean, some of them are really eloquent in terms of what they were saying.
It's true. I think for me, kind of the saddest moment was there's this one guy who got up there with, I think it was Jesse Sharkey, who was trying to give him his time. And you can't cede your time during the, or maybe it was Jackson Powder, but it was one of those guys who was ceding his time to this one guy. And they turned off the microphone because you can't do that. And then the guy's just yelling as he's being carried out, like, we have an elevator, whereas the school that they're going to doesn't have an elevator. And, it sort of makes you think, like, what's going on here? It's just, to me, that was just sort of a poignant moment.
Just after the vote yesterday, the mayor's office predictably issued a news release and said that the board vote will, as the mayor has maintained, help ensure that every child in the city has access to an education that matches their full potential. That's the city line. Not a big surprise there, but it contained a sentence that I thought was, in the long scheme of things, kind of uncharacteristic for the mayor. This one sentence: I know this is incredibly difficult. That struck me as You're laughing. Well, it seemed a little more sympathetic than the mayor has often
maybe
seen.
Maybe he learned from the past. Maybe
Well,
he learned
that's-
from the strike.
I mean, if he learned, what did he learn? What does that say, or how is that different from what we've heard before?
I think what during the strike time, I mean, it was much more combative. The language was much more combative, and I think that led to the strike in the end. So I think maybe his terminology here was in a way, at least attempting to be understanding of what's at stake here for many students, many lives. At the same time, though, those words, I mean, pretty much every board member said the same word. So it's almost like it was like scripted, like everybody was told, that we're going to talk about how this is a difficult decision. This is a difficult. Everybody said that. So.
Well, and if they got their talking points from the mayor, which doesn't seem like a big stretch. Mark Brown in today's Sun-Times raises the question that if indeed this school board was, as has been the case for years, controlled by the mayor, that it's time to return to an elected school board. I ask you, had this been an elected school board, do you think things would have come out differently?
Actually, just to say that we've never had an elected school board.
Never?
It's sort of a fallacy. We've had certain moments where the school board was appointed, was driven by some community groups or nominate them, but it was never elected like everybody went, or at least not in my publisher's Linda Lenz's memory, and
Linda
she's been
has a
around
great
forever,
memory,
so
and
I'm going to
withdraw
trust her.
Let me rephrase it. Had we had an elected school board, if we ever did, and we probably did, would it have played out differently? And if so, I mean, what might have happened? And is it something that Chicago should explore?
I think it's so complicated because we've never sort of experienced it. At the same time, I understand the argument for an elected board, and I sort of feel bad for these board members because I do know that they did put a lot of time and effort into this. I mean, they all visited 10, 20 schools, and so they did put time and effort into it. And some claim, some said that they've never talked to the mayor. At the same time, though, I mean, when they were appointed by the mayor, they were appointed for a reason, right? Because these were people that sort of understand or have the same understanding of what's at stake in the school district as he does. Otherwise, they wouldn't be appointed. So from the get-go, there's a certain understanding that they have the same vision as him, right? So will an elected school board sort of solve that problem? I don't know. I mean,
Well, and we know from situations like Los Angeles, for instance, that there's currently, or they've just voted, right, in a school board election there, and I don't follow this super closely, but you have situations where all kinds of money is poured into the races. You have essentially the same sort of political forces that are already in play trying to fight influence school reform policy. You just have those forces then involved basically in trying to get their candidate elected to the school board. And right now we have, well, I don't think it's just right now, but right now the sort of moneyed forces, we have a lot of money and power, political power, lined up behind a particular school reform strategy that Chicago is implementing. And it involves opening new schools, in particular charter schools. It involves questioning the idea of whether the school district should even be providing education, or should we just be subcontracting out education. It involves school choice. So the notion that wherever you live, you can go to any school, in the school district. And giving parents a choice about what types of schools they're interested in. So this is sort of what we're in the midst of. If we were to have an elected school board, I can't imagine that those forces wouldn't be pouring money into electing a candidate. And the teachers union, which has a very different philosophy about what sort of reform strategies we should be pursuing, would also pour money into seeing a candidate more favorable to their thinking be elected. I think everything that's happening here would just play out sort of in a different way.
Yeah.
Interesting. We're in the home stretch. I want to bring this back down to families of Chicago, families with kids in schools, families without kids in schools. So will these closures lead to more violence? That's certainly been one of the concerns. Do we have any evidence that these closings and kids having to walk farther in many cases to school, sometimes through what some would consider hostile neighborhoods, do we have a safety issue, a real safety issue, or is that
I think it's best to sort of think about it from the perspective of those communities. I mean, it's very easy if you're sort of isolated from those communities to say, well, all of Chicago has a violence issue, and so we're just going to sort of disregard it. But if you go into these communities and you spend some time there and you actually talk to the people in the communities and you actually spend some time with the schools, you know, you get a sense that there's a lot at stake here. I mean, I've talked to a lot of principals, none of them on the record.
Thanks to Chicago Public Schools.
None of them on the record.
Very strict.
But, you know, they've talked about, and the ones with this whole issue that the receiving school coming in is going to be a rival gang, they're really concerned. I mean, it's not just, these were schools that have sort of accepted the idea that, you know, they're going to be closing and they're going to be moving into another school. So they're sort of given up on the fight, right? But at the same time, they're really, I mean, this is like stuff that's really stressing people out. They're really concerned about what the environment's going to be like in that school. So it's not just the walk. It's not just the walk and, you know, the abandoned houses that you're seeing and, you know, whatever the dangers are on the street. It's when you get inside the building and you're sort of confronted with people that you've had rivalries with for a long time, for decades. What's going to be the environment there? What's going to be the bullying there, the harassment there? There was a story I wrote just sort of at the beginning of this process. I can't remember, was it March sometime? And it was about this two different school cultures within one building. It was actually about a charter school and a neighborhood school. Well, the reason I wrote that story was because it talked about the safety issues that happen when you collide two cultures together. And there was a lot that happened within that school. You know, there was threats that happened, there was fighting that happened, and then on top of all of that, that neighborhood school, you know, was sort of like I don't want to say the headquarters, but it had a significance to the vice lords. And sort of CPS didn't know this going into pairing those two together. And that's what's at stake here. People, I don't think, realize the extent of the safety issue.
Yesterday, I thought one thing that was interesting was there was a police officer who was there speaking and saying, you know, we put in these safety plans, but even he said, you know, a lot of these communities have not gotten together, and we're kind of hoping that by the kids being together, like learning and playing together, that they will be able to, that it will change like the community on the outside. And you know, it's sort of maybe just my cynicism. I'm sort of like, oh yeah, well, let's hope that happens. I mean, that seems like a pretty big hope that might not come true.
Will this plan save money?
Well,
it'll save some, I guess.
Say, it's according to Board President Vitale, undeniable that it will save money, right?
And Henry Beenan
also
said
undeniable.
President.
We can say from other studies and from actual numbers. First of all, I don't believe any news organization. We all have received the number, $43 million is the annual expected savings in mostly in out years, let's say. $43 million saved by closing 54 schools. I'm not sure what the revised number will be since we've taken some of those schools off the list. But we asked for and never received an actual accounting of that. We were told that's a net, which would mean, okay, you've factored in what your savings are and also some expenses like busing. We never received a detailed accounting of that. I hope that when the district reveals the budget, we might get some more information about what this plan will really cost us and what it saves us.
We're in the lightning round now.
Lightning round.
What happens to those empty buildings?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think they've got to figure all of that out, and that's part of, you know, whether they make money off of this. Can they sell some of these buildings? And there's a lot of facilities out there. You know, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I do think that that there were a few that stayed on the list because they actually think they can sell those buildings, as opposed to some of the ones that they, you know.
In particular, the north side ones, I think,
that's
Trumbull.
yeah.
There's some, it's not only north side. I think there's a beautiful little building, Pershing East, that we're closing.
Right by the
Gorgeous
lake.
building right on the lakefront. I can see
Condos.
a little private, it's a tiny little building. It's gorgeous. It'll be a lovely little preschool for some private school.
Is this a done deal? There's still legal matters, legal protests pending, right? Is it done?
Those federal lawsuits are going to be really difficult to be able to bring in an injunction. I think it's going to be very hard. So I think it's pretty much a done deal.
And our political reporters are saying giving the moratorium attempt in Springfield almost zero chance. And those were the two sort of hopes that folks had beyond this vote, the lawsuits and the moratorium attempts to basically stop these closings from being implemented. Right. That's also, though, really tough, because once you have a school announce that it's closing, you have parents making a big exodus. And even if closings were, implementation of these closings were to be stopped, I think, these, as of yesterday's vote, these schools are dead.
I'm going to put that down as a yes. This is a done deal.
Done deal.
What's next in this process? What has to happen over the summer? Quick answer to this one.
People have to get enrolled. People have to figure out where they're going to send their child to school, and the school district, most importantly, has to try to figure out how where kids are going to be, because the whole budget is based on it. The school by school budgets. It's a really big deal, and they haven't handed out the school by school budgets yet. It's already coming on June. It's way late in the year. This is how principals know: do they hire teachers? Do they fire teachers? Do they have the money for an extra security card? Principals know nothing right now. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they can get themselves together.
And that's when we're going to get a real sense of how many teachers actually were able to retain their job. It's not until those principal budgets come out.
And can I say one more thing? I think we as reporters and the public, you mentioned people don't have kids in school. We're talking about spending a lot of money on receiving schools. Historically, the kids assigned to the receiving school have not gone there. And I have been to many schools where people are saying, I am never sending my kid to that school that they've assigned. They'd rather actually go somewhere else but the receiving school. Still, the public is signed up to pay a lot of money, invest a lot of money in the receiving schools. I think it'll be something to watch to see whether kids actually enroll in those schools where we're investing so many capital and programmatic dollars.
And last week, the school CEO, she sent out a letter to principals, basically now sort of throwing one more thing into the loop, saying that basically parents who don't want to send their kid to the receiving school can now send them to any school that has capacity.
Be a long, busy summer. Thank you very much. Our guests, ACE education reporters, Sarah Karp, Linda Lutton, Noreen Ahmed-Ullah. Thank you for coming, all of you.
Thank you.
You've been watching Chicago Newsroom, a community service of CAN TV. You can find this show. You may be finding it right now on cable, but you can also see it online at this address, which I don't actually see, but you will on television. Next week I'll be back, and eventually, I promise you, Ken Davis will return. Don't worry about him. He's off having fun somewhere. I'm sure of it. And thank you all to the Crack CAN TV production team. They make this job easy. Please stick around, read their names in the credits. You might see a sneak preview of the next Avengers movie if you watch the whole thing, or not. See ya.